Bible specifically says that if your child is unruly, if your son is disobedient and disrespectful to the parents, that you are to bring him before the town and say, this child is drunk and lazy and disrespectful, and then you stone him to death. Why don't you follow that part of the Bible?
Do you have any examples in the Bible of that happening?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, sure. Let me pull it up right now. I'll just Google it. Deuteronomy 21:18. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they are chastened to him, he will not hearken unto them, his father and his mother shall lay hold on him, bring him out to the elders of the city, and upon the gate of the place, and they shall say unto the elders of the city, this is our son, he is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey our voice, he is a glutton and a drunkard, and all the men of the city shall stone him with stones that he die. So shall you put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear.
Let me go ahead and get one opposition out the way right now. Some people are going to come on to this video and they're going to comment that the man asked, when did that happen? Not when did God give the order or the commands or give the commandments of it all. When did that happen? Now, his original question was, do you still follow this? Why don't you follow this command? Because the people during that time frame followed that command. Just because the Bible doesn't say, and then a man brought his son who had cursed him, and the town stoned him. Your Bible, your God, authorized the killing of children if they were discovered to be a drunkard or unruly or stubborn towards their parents. Most certainly, the people of that era followed this command, because it was given by your God. And the fact that your God, who you call a good God, would give such a command in itself shows that this is not a good God. And is that the only time he says something like that? No. In Exodus 21, he says that if a child curses the mother and the father, that child must die. If a child strikes a mother or a father, that child must die. Exodus 21 again. In Leviticus, it says that if a man marries a woman and then finds hatred for her, and claims that she's not a virgin, then if the elders discover that she wasn't a virgin, she is to be stoned and killed. Now, if the man is found to be lying, then he's just whipped. It's another shows the inequity of the Bible towards women. But there are multiple passages, at least about 24, 25 passages in the Bible, where it talks about killing your children if they are unruly, if they curse the mother or father, all these different things. It talks about killing your own children. The fact that those laws were given is enough to show that your God is not a just God, your God is not a good God. That these are commandments and rituals that men of that day put in place in order for them to run their society based on their culture. Now, our culture and our society has grown since then. Our morality has increased since then. And since it has, we know that these are immoral things. The problem is that people are trying to justify this within their Bible. You see, they are going to go to, I believe it's in Matthew, where the Sadducees or Pharisees came to Jesus and said, why don't your disciples follow the commandments? Who are they that they don't follow the commandments? And Jesus gives them a whole good swerve about them following the Father and all this kind of stuff. But the fact is, the morality is what changed that was changing at that time frame. And that's what your Jesus was talking about. Changing the morality. Because even at their time frame, they realized that this God had given evil commandments, that it was outside of their culture, that wasn't the Roman way. So they didn't do it, and it was being changed. But your God is supposed to be forever, unchangeable, that his commandments are his commandments. And did not your Jesus say to love the Father and keep his commandments? Did he not tell the rich young ruler, do you keep all the commandments? And the rich young ruler said, I keep the commandments. And he told him to give up his finances and follow him, and he couldn't do it. But he was fine with him keeping the commandments. That is your Bible. That is your God. And you choose to follow that. But you don't. You don't. Because you know you would go to jail. You go to prison if you were to treat your children like that. So always remember, you got to free yourself to be yourself. Because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.
The text that comes up a lot is Deuteronomy 21, 18 through 21, about a rebellious son being stoned for his rebellion. Seems like something we wouldn't do today. And if the law reflects God's character, why are we so...
Well, first of all, the Old Testament law was never intended to be the ideal law for all time. It was made for a theocratic nation in a situation that there was barbarism all around them. In fact, there's a wonderful book called Is God a Moral Monster by Paul Copan that goes into all of these things. And he points out the Old Testament law is not the ideal for all time. Now, some aspects of it were, the Ten Commandments, these kind of things. But technically, the Ten Commandments don't apply to us today because they're part of the Old Covenant. When they're repeated in the New Testament, they do apply to us today. But generally, anything from Exodus 20 right through Deuteronomy, that's all the Old Testament. And the writer of Hebrews says the Old Covenant is obsolete, Hebrews 8:13. So all that has been superseded. Now, the situation with stoning children, if you look at this, and you guys know who Dennis Prager is? Dennis Prager is a conservative Jewish man who has a radio program and has written books. He points out that this was actually, and I don't know if I can remember his argument completely, this was actually an improvement to the law at the time, because in order to have a disobedient child killed, you would have to bring them to the elders and the case would have to be made, right? Without the law, the parent in that culture was able to kill the child without any sort of agreement from anybody else. So this actually protected the child. But remember, in the Old Testament, they're living under the theocratic kingdom where punishment was greater than it is today because God is literally Israel's king. Whereas today, there is no theocracy. There is no theocratic king on the earth today as it was back in, or theocracy as it was back in Israel's time.
I guess my concern is that when people are trying to discern themselves whether or not God is worthy of love and worship, like someone's question said, they're thinking about a God who would have made a law that way, as that being an extension of his character. Even though it's not in effect today, he did that, and that makes him less credible to them.
Right, but what are they doing when they're saying that? They have a moral standard outside of themselves that they're trying to say God doesn't meet.
Right.
If they're an atheist, they have no moral standard outside themselves.
So this person's not an atheist.
Okay, if this person's not an atheist, here is the only legitimate way of saying the God of the Bible is immoral. God does exist, but he's not the God of the Bible. Okay, then make your case about this other God, and what do you do with the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead and affirm the Old Testament?
They would say that evidence is shaky, and they would also say that, I guess, like that's their problem. They're agnostics. So they're trying to discern which God. They believe all of the theological arguments, scientific arguments.
Okay, well then I would say just continue to do research and continue to follow the evidence where it leads.
And they landed at Deuteronomy 21 and they're having a problem with it. I don't know.
Okay, well then get the book, Is God a Moral Monster? And take a look at that there.
This issue of, well, you pick and choose.
My religion says that being gay, bi, trans, lesbian is a sin.
Your religion also says that having sex during your period is a sin. How come you ignore that? Your religion also says that eating bacon is a sin. How come you ignore that? Your religion also says eating lobster is a sin. Cutting the sides of your hair is a sin. Wearing clothes made out of mixed fabrics is a sin. Getting a tattoo is a sin. A man trimming the edges of his beard is a sin.
You run all over the Leviticus and these other places, and you talk about an abomination, but then, you'll eat shellfish, and, and you'll cut the edges of your beards, and you'll sow different seeds in your fields, and certainly anybody heard this? Anybody heard this?
That if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, she's to be stoned to death, and that planting two different kinds of seeds in the same field is a sin. But that's too hard for you, so you've decided that God didn't mean any of that, he only meant the being gay part. Listen, if you're going to spread hatred towards others by quoting the Bible at them, make sure that you first follow the entire thing, or shut the entire up.
Language
And then for most Christians, they just start going, well, Abba, 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 Abba. Let me help you. There are three types of laws in the Bible. There's moral law that is forever binding on all people in all places in all times. We have this summarized for us in the Ten Commandments. There are also civil laws. These civil laws were for the nation of Israel as a nation in the ancient Near East. These laws expired with the nation of Israel, but they are still of general equity because they're based on those moral laws. Thirdly, we had the ceremonial laws. These ceremonial laws were laws that were designed to do two things. Number one, identify Israel as God's unique people, worshiping him uniquely in their context, and secondly, to point forward to the person and work of Christ. So when you talk about cutting the edge of the beard, you're actually talking about ceremonial law and Israel not being like the nations around them. When you're talking about their dietary laws, you're talking about Israel not being like the nations around them. When you talk about civil laws, you are right. We are not bound by those as they are, but they are of general equity. This is why in our own laws, we refer to things like negligent homicide, which in Leviticus would say, if your ox gores someone, you're accountable for what your ox has done. You don't have an ox, but you have other things that can hurt people. So we still have that same principle, which is based on our upholding of the sixth commandment. So the reason I pick and choose from the Old Testament is because, number one, New Testament writers do that and teach me how to do that. Number two, Christ has come and we are under the new covenant. However, he has fulfilled the whole law and he has actually enabled me to keep the moral law. The moral law hasn't gone anywhere. So it is still wrong for you to murder me or me to murder you. It is still wrong to commit adultery. It is still wrong to steal. All of these things remain. So it is because I understand how the Bible is written and I use the Bible carefully that I don't just pick and choose according to what I like, which is the exact opposite of what you are doing. So I have a better question for you. You wanted to know why I pick and choose certain parts of the Bible. I can explain it to you in painstaking detail, and it gets to an authority that's higher than me. But what I want to know is this: why is it that you get to pick and choose from the Bible, and you don't know why, and you don't know how, and whatever you choose is what you happen to want at the moment? And what's better for our society? People who decide what's right based upon what they want at the moment, or people who understand and recognize that there is a law higher than themselves and who submit and subject themselves to that law? You answer that for me, and then we can go back to our discussion on same-sex marriage.
And real quick, just because I know a lot of people are going to bring this up, the gentleman also brings up Exodus 21, I believe 17. Anyone who curses their father and mother shall be put to death is the actual term. Once again, that still applies to the civil law, not something that was commanded by God. Commandments that we have by God was the 10 Commandments. And then Jesus in the New Testament came by and renewed the old ways, not to change them, but to fulfill and renew. God bless you. Keep studying your Bible.